Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the August 21st WSU Food Systems Hub meeting. And you can see here a photo from the Washington Farm to School Network retreat that we attended last fall. And again, another time that we were all able to get together face to face, but it feels good to be able to at least get together with all of you here on Friday mornings. Hope you're doing well. I'm joined today, my name is Laura Lewis. I'm director of the Food Systems Program, and I'm joined today by Nicole Witham, who's our statewide coordinator, Abba Kaiser, who's our project manager, and Tia Taylor, who has been helping us maintain our hub site, as well as providing office coordination. So our meeting today, I'll give an overview of the WSU Food Systems Hub, and then we are going to talk about food policy councils. And we have Laura Ridenour here from the Whatcom Food Network. She's going to talk about the Whatcom Food Network, as well as some of the work that she's doing on an upcoming retreat centering equity in the Whatcom Food Network and food systems goals. We have Pat Muntz here of the Spokane Food Policy Council. She's going to talk about the recent assessment survey. And then we're hoping to have some folks join us from the Clark County Food System Council, and anyone else who's from a food system council who's on the call today or has been affiliated with one who wants to share, please let us know. Just put your name in the chat box and we'll make sure that we call on you. So just a welcome again to everyone. Please introduce yourself in the Zoom chat box, who you are, where you're located, and what you do. And also use this chat box throughout the call today to update resources, provide information, ask questions, comment on anything that you are seeing and hearing. So a little bit about the food systems program. We're about 3 years old. We used to be the small farms team and evolved to have a more holistic view of the food system beyond just sustainable production practices. We seek to work with communities throughout the state to foster viable farm businesses, optimize sustainable natural resource stewardship, and to promote scaled processing and distribution, always in the pursuit of access to healthy food for all. You can see the scope of our reach across the state with the food systems team members who are both WSU faculty and staff, as well as external partners. We have colleagues across the state in all 39 counties and on the Colville Reservation, as well as at our campus locations. So the purpose of the Food Systems Hub, this is to provide a space to connect regularly with our team members, as well as external partners working to support the Washington food system, to collect and update resources related to COVID-19, to deploy our dynamic needs assessment tool, as well as to provide time and space to share stories and receive support from one another. Just a reminder of our calendar of events page. So please send us information for upcoming events and we'll get them posted here. And you can use this as a helpful resource to see what's coming up. We have both COVID related as well as non-COVID related events being posted here. Just a plug to take the needs assessment, the tool that we have every week. You can find the link here. And then I just wanted to give a shout out to our food systems team for producing the Quinoa Research Symposium. So I'm not going to put Abba on the spot today to give an update on the symposium itself, but for those of you who may not be aware, we hosted an international research symposium in collaboration with the WSU Seed Systems Lab over the Sustainable Seed Systems Lab on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And Abba was the leader of this effort, and just a really incredible program that was put together. We had about 1,000 people register from over 50 countries around the world, and we had about 400 people participate on the first day. It was really, really exciting, and you can just see the program here. And just for us as a team that typically convenes people face to face, it was really, really just heartening to see everyone participate in this virtual platform. So we will have some updated information about this program coming up, and you can always go to quinoasymposium.com to look at the program itself and the YouTube channel that has all of the programs available for you to watch. Okay, so without any further ado, I'd like to invite our Food Policy Council folks to take the floor. And I haven't looked at the participant list. Oh, there's Laura right there. I can see her. So Laura, I'm going to turn it over to you first and let you take it away.
Thank you. I'm curious first, before we get started, if anybody can raise their hand, who else is here to represent food policy councils or to talk about food policy councils? I see Pat Moon's waving. You can also raise your hand virtually. It looks like there's a lot of people here on their phones. Okay, so maybe just me and Pat.
It looks like Sarah Sullivan and Colette
Okay,
DePhelps is on today as well.
Okay,
great.
Yeah, just wanted to get a sense. And so that gives us, if there's 3 or 4 of us, that gives us how much time, Laura?
Yeah. Well, we have quite a bit of time. We go until, I mean, the meeting itself is open until noon. So you know, take it away, whatever you need to be able to go over your program. Most people don't go more than 20 minutes on a kind of a single topic, but it's up to you.
Okay, no worries. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity to talk about the Whatcom Food Network. I wanted to start by giving a little bit of context for food policy councils, because I actually studied food policy councils as an undergrad. I was a returning student after I was working in sustainable agriculture and had farming training and had worked on farms. I went back to school because there was a pretty big lack in the leadership in sustainable agriculture, and I wanted to be part of helping to continue to meet our goals and be in that leadership role. Social change and food shaped who I am. I was born in Detroit. My parents were back to the landers. My mom and I lived on a farming commune in Tennessee called The Farm. So I grew up with a vegetarian mindset, and then also my dad was a food processor. He had the first certified organic food processing company in California, Wildwood Natural Foods. So I grew up on the manufacturing and sourcing side of things as well. But it wasn't until my mid-20s that I got interested in agriculture. And I was, as a returning student, I got really interested in food studies and the political economy of agriculture at the University of California, Santa Cruz. And it was there that I met visiting Professor Janet Poppendek, who was teaching a course on hunger in America. And I learned about community food security and the Community Food Security Coalition. I'm giving this context because this is how food policy councils really took off in the United States. And I think also the context for what's our theory of change? How are we actually enacting the type of change that we'd like to see in the food system? Comes from these roots around recognizing what was happening in urban settings that was led by the Community Food Security Coalition. And I had an opportunity to do an internship with them in Washington, D.C. And having spent, at that point, I was already 10 years into working for Community Alliance with Family Farmers and California Certified Organic Farmers and the Organic Farming Research Foundation. And suddenly I was like, whoa, the people's cause. Like, there were, understanding food deserts came from that national coalition. All of these things that we now consider very important in the context of food policy councils and in the context of food systems work. This is before many people even understood what a food system was. So I got really interested in a conversation that was being had in California by food shed funders who had been funding sustainable agriculture work for 20 years. And we're sort of like, so where's the change? Where's the fundamental shift that we have been working toward for so long? In studying social change, and working with the Community Food Security Coalition, began to see how policy is the major lever for change. And we see that in Donella Meadows' work around thinking in systems, where are the biggest levers for actually affecting a system. So I ended up focusing my senior project on forming a food policy council in Santa Cruz County, and then also worked on a statewide food policy council effort in Colorado. And then when I moved here to Whatcom County, started the Whatcom Food Network. That initiation was initially with the idea that we would be a food policy council. There were a ton of new groups new food projects coming online. It was 2009, and the Whatcom Farm to School project had just been launched. We had a new infusion of funding around various food programs, and suddenly there were all of these actors and organizations, but we weren't really coordinated. So the first year of the Whatcom Food Network was really just collectively getting a handle on what do we know from the recent food assessment that was done, which is a very important element of Food Policy Council work. And then what do we know about what we're doing, and what are we collectively working toward? So I'm going to share my screen once I make sure I'm on the right page here. Just a little, our existing web page for the Whatcom Food Network. So we launched officially in late 2011. Let's see, here we go. And this is what it looks like today. There was a lot of effort to understand what a network structure should look like, what our purpose is. So now our purpose is, embedded somewhere in here. So we did this mapping around, what is involved in the food system, what are the internal elements that are necessary for the food system to be functioning. So we identified the key sectors: land, water, farming and fishing, labor, processing, distribution, consumption, and waste. And then also made sure that we were seeking collaborations from across all of those sectors. So we've now conducted a number of, I think 3 food assessments since then. And then we also, I'm just going to show you this tab, organizations working within our food system. So a fair amount of effort was also put into understanding who's doing what. So in the area of technical support, education, and advocacy, and mapping out who those players are. I also wanted to mention that WSU, Whatcom County Extension, was the sort of the backbone organization hosting the website and our communications for the first year and a half. And then the health department was a key player there, and also through my role at Sustainable Connections at the time. We also did fundraising in order to, so these are some of the players in water, and then did fundraising in order to have a quarter-time staff person help with the administration. I believe 2 years ago, there was an effort to form the Whatcom Food System Committee, which is the would-be Food Policy Council as advisory to our county council now. And they're just getting started on understanding their role, and now it's their job to do a food assessment. And they also are doing what the Whatcom Food Network did and what all food policy councils need to do as a collective group, which is understand what what does the community need and what their role is collectively, and have collective agreements. So the majority of what the Food Policy Council has been doing, the Whatcom Food Network has been doing over the years is bringing people together through events around topics across each of the sectors. And this spring, pivoted to do our online meetup, which is documented here in terms of what people were experiencing in the COVID shift in terms of chronic gaps or roadblocks in the local food system. I have to say, not a lot of new things came up here. we knew that basically the volume dial had been turned up in COVID, and I think the main thing that we were wanting to recognize is that the existing systems and the networks for support were what was working. So here you can see, and I'll let you go ahead and reference that on your own if you like, the challenges and ideas. And then we also had the chat notes that came out of that and some of the silver linings. The main thing that people said that was important to them was solidarity and seeing each other. And so we tossed around the what's our role right now when everyone's completely overwhelmed. And also because we were holding it right before George Floyd, we didn't have as much of a focus on social justice, but in the follow-up to that event, that became our focus. So we just hosted a steering committee retreat yesterday, and started to have some, somewhat difficult conversations, mostly around where are we at now as an organization? What's our structure? What's our structure that allows us to take action to affect the inequities that we see in our food system? And we wanted to start first from the inside. So I hope that I'm accurately representing the group, but I would say that I think that some of where we're at is understanding how our structure has evolved. Like, one of the things that I think is really important for all food policy councils and networks, and I would really be interested in inviting Brandon Bourne to reflect on his experience as well, is that organizational change, particularly over 10 years, it needs to be expected and attended to. And so as where we're at now in 2020, aside from COVID, is that, a lot of things have changed in our food system, particularly structurally, but also in terms of key players. And there are a ton of new people participating in the Food Network. And I'd say almost all of the steering committee have only been a part of the network for about a year. So we have this major turnover, and a need to reinvigorate the sense of where we started from, why we're doing what we're doing, and how we're doing it, which is a unstable place in some ways. It's change making on the inside, as well as understanding, how can we affect the most change as a network. So I also wanted to hold up this book, and I can put the link in the chat. We used, in the formation of the Food Network, we used this book, The Networks at Work by Paul Van de Vitter and Mira Mandel. I grabbed this, and we all got a copy of this in the formation of the Food Network, because it has considerations for before you start, as you're forming, and then actually as you're minding the network resilience and membership goals. But it's, because it's kind of a lot of investment. We need to, the majority of us are volunteers. The majority of us are seeking a certain amount of professional support, as well as sort of personal support for the long haul. Brandon is asking, is the network connected to government in a formal way? The main way that we were connected was by having a health department staff member involved, and the health department has played a role in supporting the work of the network. And then now that there is a food, what they're calling them, what they are called. No one wanted to say the word policy when they were forming this county advisory group, and absolutely not talking about equity when forming the county advisory group. So it's called the Food Systems Committee, and their charter is very broad, and they are a appointed body by the county council. Where we're at as a Whatcom Food Network is now we need to be taking the time to understand. So we have one appointed position from the Food Network to serve on that council. Sorry, I've got a 7-year-old coming in.
I'm not a 7-year-old.
Almost 2 weeks. So we have one appointed position from the Food Network on what would be our Food Policy Council.
These are new.
Shh, I'm talking to a whole lot of people.
These are new.
I'd love for more questions.
Ooh.
So kiddo, it's really hard for me to focus if you're in this room. Can you close the door, please? Thank you.
I just
Go
had
ahead.
a question about, you mentioned that there was some staff support coming from the Department of Health, and how is the network currently staffed? Do you still have like a
There's
partial staffing?
Two ways. So yeah, so we have these two groups, right? So there's the Food Network, and then the Food Network took a big role in advocating for the policy that led to the establishment of the Whatcom Food Systems Committee. And the staffing of the Whatcom Food System Committee is staffed by a public health staff member who was hired specifically to serve partially, it's not a full-time position, that committee. She has experience in staffing food policy councils, and in COVID was completely turned over to rapid response work. The other thing to note that's interesting in terms of managing food systems in a crisis, that committee was not allowed to meet because they hadn't figured out public meetings and actually allowing Zoom meetings. So that committee was not called on as a rapid response in any way except for that staff member or individually. And then the Whatcom Food Network has, through a grant from the Community Foundation, a quarter-time staff person who is also a staff person at Sustainable Connections at this time. But we found over time that that role can be served out of any organization. The other nice thing about the Networks at Work book, because I think we're kind of in a place where we might be completely rethinking the structure, because it's kind of the Food Network is a highly structured at this point, with a steering committee and then subcommittees that plan the events. Is how do we really center the membership and make sure that all of the voices are present? So we're going to use our next forum to look at, there were agreements that we set forth in terms of membership that have not been being utilized, but we realized that the power of the collective is in the agreements that we all are working toward and our goals that we're all working towards. So we're going to be focusing in the fall an online forum on the goals of the Food Network. And we have established in each sector, originally in I think 2013, we did a whole bunch of community forums and established 3 goal areas under each sector, but we haven't been actively measuring progress on those or how we're going to achieve the change in those areas. That's the major outcome from yesterday's meeting.
Do we have more questions for Laura or about the Whatcom Food Network? And I know we have several more people who've joined the call today who are also associated with food policy forums or councils and other types of groups. So please speak up if you have a comment or you'd like to ask a question.
Laura, this is Brandon Bourne. I'm curious if you have some suggestions on, based on your examination of other food policy councils and your experience in Whatcom, kind of a best practices and pitfalls or traps to avoid.
I bet every food policy council has a long list of those, right? Yeah, I think that, yeah, I personally struggle between what's my leadership role in terms of the vision for the group, and then how much can the group embody that vision and really take that on themselves. So I think some of the best practices is helping people to understand, what does change look like on the long haul, and building in policies and practices that allow the group to remain flexible and responsive over time. Because, we see like Portland's, Multnomah Food Policy Council was huge in making really important policy changes. And, members of that council will say like, it imploded. and so how do we, this is funny, Brandon, your image is showing up with a picture of you over the front of your face. It looks really funny. I think that having a bit of understanding, like building in flexibility and sort of grace for the process, which not a lot of people have patience for, but understanding that is actually the work, that people coming together coming from, often disparate sectors, the work is figuring out our commonality, and then also the policies that are pointedly going to make the most measurable impact. That's I think really broad, but finding ways to build that in. And that was part of what I just liked about the simplicity of the Networks That Work book, attending to how do these multi-stakeholders, how are we designing for collaboration throughout the process and throughout the Food Policy Council, so that the outcomes that we're designing for are not just about the policies and the community impacts of the policies, but the actual effectiveness of the group. So does that resonate with your experience? You've been serving on the Food Policy Council or Acting Food Policy Council of Seattle-King County for a long time. I'd really love to hear your experience too.
Yeah, I noticed that Laura Raymond is also on, and she and I were part of a small team of about, 9 to 12 people who slowly forced open the local policy network to food through this thing that we called the Acting Food Policy Council. And our threat was that we were going to leave at some point, and the work wouldn't be done at all. And that what we really wanted to do was work ourselves out of a job by getting rid of the word acting and having a local food policy council, which ultimately kind of happened. And the political story of how it ended up at PSRC is sort of striking. And our original intent was a King County level, and the question of like, what's the region that you talk about when you talk about food networks and food policy, especially in a place like Western Washington, where people really want to be specific about King County. And we'd always joke about, oh, right, because we don't care about Snohomish County farmers. Oh, wait, no, we do. It's the Whatcom and Skagit people that we don't. Oh, no, wait, we care about those too. How do we define local? How do we define, what our region is? And I see Diane Dempster just come on as well. We struggled an awful lot at PSRC, I think. It ended up there because the county at the time, which was at the very first time that Ron Sims tweeted out that we were $43 million in the hole, the county was, and they said, this is a great idea, but we don't have any money for it. And so somehow it ended up at PSRC, and that was good because of the regional element, but it was really bad, I think, in the long run. So we didn't, unlike Portland's, we didn't implode, we just dissipated. The energy dissipated. And I think that that happened because of PSRC and the nature of that type of organization, which frankly, I think to myself, I should have known better. And maybe that was a thing that as we organized, we didn't have a chance to get around it. It was a great opportunity, but it's a membership regional transportation planning organization, right? It's the Metropolitan Planning Organization. They do a lot of pass-through money for transportation. And because they're membership, they rely on all these communities to pay in. And so they do not want to set policy. And what we found is that they just weren't a strong enough organization. And so we had become a membership org. So people were like, I like your network model because everybody's there and you have these different roles, but this was a membership thing that didn't have, so it was quasi-democratic, but it didn't have really decision-making authority. So then the question became why in the long run, and I love your point about succession and thinking of this as a process, and that's part of the deal. And that the way that those kinds of organizations are set up through PSRC are probably not exactly that. And so there was a long-term mismatch in the design or the idea of getting things done. And I think a lot of our members at the Regional Food Policy Council just felt like ultimately it really wasn't worth their time. And then, the other question I have, especially in places where we have a lot of student activity, and so I think about around Bellingham, certainly down in Portland, for us, how do you, and this is going to sound terrible coming from somebody who works at a university, how do you avoid student takeover? Right. So what happened in Portland is you had a bunch of very well-intended, kind of radicalized students who don't have didn't have a realistic connection to the food system and would suggest things and sort of take over by numbers, but didn't really know how things got done. Either at the agricultural level, like on the farm, to the policy level, to distribution channels. So they're suggesting kind of wild things that, those in familiar with the industry would just kind of roll their eyes at and say, well, that's really not possible. And so that was one of the reasons that it kind of broke down, is that the numbers shifted as it got more radicalized, which is, again, a little ironic for me to talk about, but.
Interesting. Yeah. You made that point about what's local, and in Northern Colorado, when we started talking about having a food policy council there, this work is very contentious. Sometimes I forget how contentious it is. I went into a mostly landowners farmer meeting to let them know that we were excited about forming a food policy council, and it just got completely shot down in so many ways. And the politically sort of maybe more dispersed way to do that work that they discovered was to recognize that they have a 4-county region that really supports the agricultural structure and the food chain. And so they ended up doing a food assessment as I think a tri-county group. So really looking at the structural elements of the food system and where, in particular, like Weld County produces a lot of machinery and equipment that is used in the 2 neighboring counties. And I thought that was really interesting. I hadn't seen that happen in other food policy councils. But that area of jurisdiction in terms of making policy seemed to be less of the issue and more about actually what is the structure of the food system. So it looks like Spokane is up.
Yeah, I was going to transition to Spokane. We have plenty of time for additional discussion, and I just want to thank you, Laura, so much for providing a lot of context around food policy councils beyond just your work with the Whatcom Food Network. So thank you. And I know we have Pat Muntz to talk about the Spokane Food Policy Council. And Pat, let us know if there's anyone else on the line who's going to be joining you. Pat, are you there? Oh, there you are. You're muted.
Duh. Yeah, Chris Ostrander is also on the call, and he's our council vice president.
Excellent.
So Chris can chime in because he's been intimately involved in designing and getting our food assessment survey out. The Spokane Food Policy Council started with impetus of the Spokane City Council around 2012, and it grew slowly because of we had some funding from the city council, which provided us with a quarter or half-time assistant to kind of just keep the paper moving. And took us a while to get our bylaws together and then start, answering the question to a conservative community about what is a food policy council. And 2 years, let's see, fall of 2018, we held a community summit where we gathered about 250 people at Gonzaga University, and Gonzaga was a really good partner in helping us get some of this stuff off the ground. To kind of assess, hey, where's the community with food? And we came out of that with the realization that we really did need to do a food assessment because nobody knew who was all the players. Nobody knew what was existing in the food system. Spokane County doesn't provide any support to the food system in general, shall we say, from a standpoint of ordinances or even commissioner support. The small farms network here, the specialty growers are here, but they don't get as much respect in the economy as folks on the west side see their small farms, which is a challenge. So we worked through last year, hired a project director, Janelle Harvey, to help us get our survey off the ground. We do have quite a bit of support from the regional health district, the Spokane Regional Health District, which has been great because we have funding for Janelle. We also have access to their some of their support, excuse me, support and staff. Including their GIS specialist, and also with the survey, they were willing to review our questions and work them out. The council right now is made up of folks from 2 extension offices, the health district, community-based organizations, so that and Second Harvest. So it's a fairly broad community, but not without its challenges of getting other members of the community, the farmers, the producers involved. So it's an ongoing challenge. But we set our survey out around the 1st of August. And so we're just beginning to collect data back from it. And we broke it into surveys that go to consumers, producers, processors, distributors, food waste, and that includes food recovery. And so each sector was, given their own survey to take. What we're finding is the consumers are helping us out a lot. There we've got quite a few responses from the consumer, but we're a little short on some of the others. Notwithstanding, it's the middle of harvest for a lot of our producers, so responding to emails is probably not at the top of their list. Processors, we're trying to get a better handle on our food rescue, food waste is slowly responding. So we extended the deadline to the 26th of August. And what we're trying to do, as some of you may think, well, it'd be good to take the survey. We're trying to assess Northeast Washington because that's the food shed for Spokane. And so we're trying to focus it in on this area because we are a completely different area from the west side. And we really have not done anything in this way prior to this. And COVID issues probably just highlighted that we really didn't have a handle on what was our food system up here. So this is going to help us make that leap. Chris, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I do. Thanks, Pat, for that introduction. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. Sometimes I have problems with this microphone. So just to give a little bit of context, I was too busy with my life and farming when the Food Policy Council was first put together, but I was very interested in it because we had tried in Spokane to do something similar years before. I do remember, I think I sat in on one of the first couple of meetings of the Food Policy Council back in 2012, but didn't join until, I don't know, a year or so ago, 2 years ago. But I'm very happy that I did join, and I think that things are really starting to move. The Food Policy Council, before I got there, it actually did produce a very nice report that's available on our website, SpokaneFoodPolicy.org. It was called the Food System Inventory, and it was an assessment of the food system in the Spokane region, and it was actually accepted by the Spokane City Council. And in fact, the council said, okay, fine, now we have this assessment. They actually asked the Spokane Food Policy Council, which is an independent community organization. It's not affiliated with the city at all. We used to have a city employee as a part-time staff person, but right now we're independent 501c3. And the city council asked us to produce an action plan, a food system action plan, and that's what we're working on now. That's why we had that gathering at Gonzaga. That's why we're putting together this survey so that we can fulfill this request from the city council to come up with a regional food action plan. And let me see, there was another thing I wanted to say. Oh yeah, and some of the early successes of the Spokane Food Policy Council were advocating and helping to implement some small changes to the way, to the Spokane city government, the way that it handles things in food system issues. For instance, the adoption of regulations allowing small livestock within the city of Spokane for people to be able to grow produce in their backyard and sell it from a stand on their front yard without a permit. I think there were a couple more which I can't think of right now, but it's very challenging now with the pandemic. Was we wanted to have much more personal contact with our stakeholders as part of the survey process, and now that's going to have to be less personal. But we're, so we are reaching out. If anybody can help us, we really need to hear from producers growers who produce within 100 miles of Spokane. Would be great to have them participate in the survey. And we're also, like Pat said, a little short on people responding from the processing industry. And another thing that we did was we have one member of the Spokane Food Policy Council from the Spokane tribe, Melody Wynn. And we actually she helped us put together a special, so we have these various categories: grocers, distributors, restaurants, food waste, producers, and consumers. But we did create a special consumer survey that incorporated some questions that are geared specifically to the Indigenous community in our region. And we're hoping that we get some really valuable input from there. And one thing that I think is a shortcoming, and it's primarily just due to lack of funding, is we weren't able to produce a survey that that was translated into different languages. That would have been something. We still need to do that, and we also need to work on the diversity within the Food Policy Council. But I think we're on an upswing. We're hoping to receive word from the USDA about a grant that we put in for Urban Agriculture Innovation Grant. So we should hear about that in a few days, and that will kind of put us on the map. But also, I think that the USDA also has a program that we're interested in called the Regional Food System Partnerships program. But we're definitely interested in that. So we've got our hands full. We're a small group. We don't have a huge amount of funding, but we are, we're at it every day.
Thanks, Chris. Do we have questions for Pat and Chris about the Spokane Food Policy Council and just the food system in general out in the northeastern part of the state? You can pop them in the chat box as well. And you mentioned that you had some staffing as well through, was it Department of Health?
Well, we've got funding through them for our project director, and then staff time for a couple of people, and access to their planning and support staff for some technical stuff. So that's how we tie into them.
Okay, I'm going to move on to our next slide, which I know we have a couple folks who joined us from Clark County to talk a little bit about the Clark County Food System Council. And I know for myself, when I first came back to Washington in 2011, I believe this was one of the first food system councils I was introduced to in the state at sometime around then, maybe a couple years later. So excited to hear what they've been up to. And I know we have Diane on the call, as well as, is there anyone else from Clark County?
I think Terry Croker is on the call with the WSU Clark County. So hi, I'm Diane Dempster, and I live in Clark County now. I moved here about a year ago and joined the Food System Council about a year ago. So I since I'm fairly new, I don't have all the background, but I'll share what I can. So the council was originally started, I believe, maybe in 2012, and then went through some changes in 2016, 2017, and was basically defunded by the county council. It was originally under the auspices of the health department, but the county council decided that they didn't want the health department, this is my understanding, they didn't want the health department dealing with something so radical as a food system. So it was taken, so the health department was no longer involved. And so the Food System Council group reinvented themselves as a nonprofit and non-affiliated with a government entity per se. So Christine Perry is the chair of the council, and she works for WSU. She's the acting director of WSU Clark County. And Holly Hansen is the assistant, and she runs Second Mile Food Hub. So the members of the council are, there's someone from Waste Connections, which is a garbage and recycling organization, Clark County Food Bank. There's 2 farmers. Heritage Farm is a big educational facility in Clark County. There's a member from there. There's a group called Slow Food, and the member of that group on the council. Other members are related to, there's 2, well, there's more than 2, but there's 2 people that represent farmers markets in the area, and other folks that have been involved in the political organization of the state. There's another group called Friends of Clark County, which I'm also on the board of, that's represented at the Food System Council because that's related to trying to preserve agricultural land where possible. Clark County is I think in kind of a unique position in Washington in that it's right on the border with Portland, just across the river. It's kind of considered a bedroom community. Agriculture is taking a major shift from rural to basically housing developments. There's a really fast growth of housing in the community. And so the nature of agriculture has changed a lot in the county, from established farms to a lot of those folks leaving and their land being developed to, and a lot of new small farms trying to get started. So there's quite a few small farms in the area, and WSU provides a good service, but there's not much of a cohesive agricultural community. And there's not any political support from the county council. It's quite conservative and pro-development, and from what I can tell. But the Food System Council has participated in, last year there was a seminar to sort of look at what needed to happen in the county, and what is, the Clark Conservation District, Zora Oppenheimer is applied for a grant to get a survey about the food system in Clark County. What I found is that all the information about farming in the community is dated from 2017 or before. So it's hard to even sort of tell who's here. I think we're in a similar position to you folks in Spokane. And there is quite an influence from, at least economically, from Portland, where Vancouver's sort of seen as a bedroom community. But there's a strong coalition of people that are very interested in developing a very localized food system. The food hub here is just beginning to they have a commercial kitchen and are starting a CSA type program. And there's quite a lot of growers that have CSAs and some UPIC. WSU has last year did a farm tour map where you could go out and visit farms on a 1 week in the fall, I believe it was. So, and there's quite a few activities we're engaging in. We had one session in February, right before COVID hit, that was an educational seminar to educate people about what is happening with agriculture in Clark County, and we're planning another one for next month. This one will be on a Zoom call, but we're going to educate people about who's farming in Clark County and the different food types of food systems that there are. So I think that's pretty much what I have to share. If there's anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer what I can.
Diane, thanks for letting us put you on the spot last minute to talk about Clark County. And you know, I had heard some of what you had mentioned, and it's interesting to see how instrumental some of these health departments have been in helping support some of this work. But then at the same time, it sounds like for Clark County, it became really complicated as well, being associated with a government entity.
Well, I think the one thing that, you know, thank heavens we have WSU here. Otherwise, we don't really have any staff supporting the Food System Council, and everyone that participates is a volunteer. So, so it kind of shows a strong interest in having one, but it's a little shocking to me to come from King County to here to find sort of not just no support, but kind of, you know, in the other way, the other direction from the county council.
Yeah, and this council was staffed at one point. There was a staff position
By
to
the health
support it.
department, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And what is the turnover like in terms of those who were initially on the council when it was affiliated with the county and now that it's a standalone organization?
I'm not quite sure. I think that was, you know, that was 3 years ago. So I think that there's several people, there's at least 2 or 3 people that were on the original council who are still on. But, you know, the council is continually reinventing itself and adding new people. So it's really a great group of people.
I want to open it up to general comments and questions, as well as feedback from other folks that are associated with food policy councils and other types of networks. I know that we have quite a few people on the phone who have been instrumental in helping support some of these networked organizations, not only in Washington. I know we have Colette on the phone as well from Idaho. So, and she's been involved in both cross-border work around food systems. And I think we have Sarah on as well from Gorge Grown, who also straddles 2 states. So if either of you feel comfortable jumping in and sharing your experience, we would welcome you, as well as anyone else.
Yeah, hi everyone. Sorry I can't be on video today, but I was actually just going to pass it off to my colleague, Jordan Haas, who is the coordinator of our Columbia Gorge Food Security Network, which is like a food systems council.
Hi, this is Jordan Haas. I am happy to share for just a few minutes about how our coalition was formed here in the Gorge and a little bit of history and how we're currently structured. So in 2015, a group of community partners came together and put out a community survey specific to food insecurity in the region. And there were over 2,000 responses to that initial survey that showed that 1 in 3 residents in the area worried about running out of food, and 1 in 5 had missed meals in the previous 12 months. And what that ended up leading to was in 2016, Oregon Governor Kate Brown officially designated Gorge Food Security as an Oregon Solutions Project, which allowed for a regional team to convene. And that initial team included producers, distributors, social service agencies, healthcare providers, and community members working to identify a solution to decrease hunger and increase access to quality food in the Columbia Gorge. And that project team represented a cross-section of Hood River, Klickitat, Sherman, Skamania, and Wasco counties. And at the conclusion of that process in 2016, the Columbia Gorge Food Security Coalition was established with 20 original member organizations. And between 2016 and 2019, membership expanded to over 40 organizations, and 2 standing committees were established during that time, a direct service and engagement committee working to inventory existing food services, identify gaps and engage new partners. And then a food system infrastructure committee that was focused on filling gaps in food infrastructure, including storage, processing, distribution, and production. In 2019, the coalition underwent a reorganization of that original committee structure, and we emerged with 5 priority areas for the Columbia Gorge Food Security Coalition. Those were food access, farmer support, policy, supporting tribal food sovereignty efforts in the gorge, and farmland preservation. And we currently have project teams working on specific time-bound projects in these identified priority areas. One example of a project that we have going on at the moment, over this past winter, we went through a community health assessment process with our coordinated care organization and are in the process of writing our community health improvement plan. And the Food Security Coalition was nominated by the folks who are leading that effort to identify the goals related to food that will go in our community health improvement plan for these next 3 years. And additionally, our work is advised by 2 standing committees. We have a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee and a funding committee that oversee the work of the coalition.
Great, thank you so much, Jordan and Sarah. Any questions? Any perspective on working across 2 states?
Yeah, so constant challenge. It's like, imagine the hoops that you jump through to find funding and partnerships and then double them. And we also have an interesting, interesting perspective on inequities on either side of the river. So there are times that Washington State has funding for projects that we can't implement in Oregon and vice versa. And so just constantly navigating those conversations with partners around what we're able to do and why we're maybe not able to do this in Klickitat and Skamania County, even though it exists in Hood River and Wasco County. And yeah, constantly seeking out funding sources that either encourage cross-state collaboration or at the very least allow for it so that we can roll out projects that happen equitably on each side of the river. I think one good example of that is the Mobile Farmers Market, which is a food access project of Gorge Grown. And right now that is operating in both Oregon and Washington and has stops on both sides of the river. And I think that I would hold that up as an example of a project that has successfully addressed that challenge.
Great, thank you. I see Colette nodding her head.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Colette DePhelps. I'm with the University of Idaho Extension, and I'm located in Moscow, Idaho. I've been involved in the Palouse Clearwater Food Coalition as one of the founders. We started our coalition around 2010, and it spans a 9-county region, so 3 counties in Washington and 6 counties in north central Idaho. So we cover Asotin, Whitman, and Garfield County, but after that there's a pass and it kind of rolls over into the Walla Walla region, and very recently the Greater Walla Walla Valley developed their own food coalition. And our language in our name as being a coalition is really specific because our role as we see it is to build relationships across the food system, to elevate what's working well, and to build partnerships to address joint challenges. So when we formed, we really did not want to compete for funds with any of the organizations that we have. We have so many nonprofit organizations within our region. We wanted to help people work together and to be more strategic about their work. And So we are fiscally sponsored by a nonprofit organization. Our annual budget is less than $6,000 a year, and that is really focused on our annual food summit, which is a one-day conference that we do every year, and we have rotated it between Moscow, Idaho, and Pullman, Washington. We also, within our region, now have a Nez Perce HIPT food coalition. HIPT is the Nimiku word for food, and that has been a coalition that really looked at some of the modeling that we had done as a regional coalition and then moved forward to develop their own, and they now have an annual food summit. So our leadership works really close across the two coalitions. We also have a One Sky, One Earth Food Coalition on the Coeur d'Alene Reservation, which is just north of us. So we have this rich diversity of our food systems and leadership, and I think we're really fortunate to have our two Native American-led food coalitions within our region as well. You know, a lot of people have talked about some of the challenges of leadership and funding, and I would say that we have seen that over time as well. We have strong leaders that rotate into the food coalition, but when their life or their position in the entity that they're involved in changes, that creates a challenge for the coalition because we don't have any of our own staff. And so we've had different people come in from economic development organizations. My predecessor at Extension, I used to be in a nonprofit organization, other people that were volunteering, and different life changes create different changes in that leadership. And the stability of University of Idaho Extension in leadership really has made a difference. And I think without that stability of leadership, you know, in a sense, we staff the coalition. And I think that that has been a really stabilizing factor. At the same time, it creates some challenges because we have to be really clear what is my community food systems programming in U of I Extension and what is the work of the coalition. And so we keep coming back to that because I definitely take direction from the coalition in my own programming, but we're really clear that when we are doing something as the coalition, we are doing it, and it's more than a team of one or two, the two being me and my staff. And this is something we interviewed the 9 food coalitions across Idaho. Only one identifies itself as a policy council, and that's in Blaine County, which is where Sun Valley is. And in our state, largely due to some of the political and philosophical diversity in our state, our coalitions are largely focused around education and relationship building. I do think that we will evolve into looking more at how we can support policy that we know within our community there's consensus around. So yesterday at our food coalition meeting, we were talking about supporting the city council moving forward to become a bee city, because pollinators has been something that our members have really wanted to promote for a long time, and then supporting the university and becoming a bee university. We have some other like city code that supports market gardening and selling from farms that our coalition has supported over time, but we really have not been policy focused because we have wanted to bring people together. I think one of the exciting things that happened pre-COVID is we really realized that we have built the literacy through our annual food summit and other activities of our regional food system. And it was time to go the next level to convene critical conversations. We see that, at least in our region, we have a lot of water concerns and land use concerns, but the conversations are siloed. And so we see now that we have enough relationships across the region that we can start to convene different types of conversations with different people. And so we had intended that this year's food summit would be land and water, but because of COVID, we have pivoted that to really looking at some of the ways COVID has revealed the resilience in our food system and then the fragility. And again, we're going to have a virtual food summit this year, but we're going to really bring in those people that we know can actually create change and support like the establishment of things like food processing, which is a weakness, livestock processing, And then also we've done a lot of work on food access because of COVID. And then the other thing I would just say is that sometimes there's a tension and a conversation that we have to keep revisiting about our mission, because we are about local food and we are about access to local food. And we have many participants that are about food access in general and not necessarily grounded in elevating the local food as part of that access, which is not a criticism, it's just a different focus. So we have a Whitman County Food Coalition that has come together, and it is all about food access. They do have some emphasis on local, but that's not the priority. So it is how we distinguish our work, is that we're about local and regional food from farm to plate.
Paulette, thank you so much. I wanted to just ask, kind of piggybacking on some of the other speakers, about it being such a large geographic region. I think you said 9 counties. Is there any connection to any cities or county government or county departments, city departments that participate in this coalition?
So, not consistently. We've had different people through leadership, through city councils that have participated. Like, so people actually participate in our food summit, yes, but in our meetings and our leadership, not consistently. We have had people from the Pullman City Council and the Moscow City Council. We've had different levels of engagement from our economic development agencies that are housed within city or county government. We've had people that participate that work for the Nez Perce tribe or the Coeur d'Alene tribe. And that is really transitional as their roles in those governmental agencies have changed. So it's just an evolving leadership, and I think we'll have engagement depending on the issues that we're targeting. So right now in our food access, we have somebody from Moscow city government that is super involved with that, because the city is really looking at that in terms of COVID. And then our city of Moscow runs the farmers market, so we've had that linkage with local food. It's a bit harder to really move out and serve those rural counties and rural geographies, and that's a conversation that we have. We can do that in the context of the food summit, but we have not had the capacity to go and actually be in those communities and build more localized coalition work in those communities. And I think that's what would be required to go the next level. And I think we'd have to probably have staff to take it that next level.
Thank you. Questions for any of our speakers today, or anyone else who wants to share about their experience with a Food Policy Council? I see we had some discussion here about the need for both independence from governmental entities, but also it looks like some need to also be connected to them in some way or another in terms of reporting. Anyone want to comment on that thread?
This is Chris Ostrander. I'll say a little bit about that. I come from a food sovereignty perspective, which is, in my mind, the fact that human beings have to be concerned about their food, no matter what, and that it's really in the community's interest for people in the community to come together to establish a sense of security around food supply, food production, and things that are concomitant to that, like farmland preservation, clean water. And so sometimes, I mean, I think always it's necessary to have active, informed people from the grassroots, from the community, discussing these issues outside of an official government capacity, because oftentimes, you know, in a government situation, the politics gets in the way of the issues at hand. And whereas it's great for a government entity like a county or a city to have a committee or something that's, you know, focused on food, which is pretty rare, which is silly. There needs to be some citizen involvement in order to be able to hold that government entity accountable, in order to be able to push effectively for policies that the government might be reluctant to address themselves. And so I'm really in favor of there always being a citizens organization that's independent of government, even if the government has some entity that's working on the food system.
Great, thanks, Chris. Diane, were you going to speak? Diane Smith?
Oh, I was, yes. And I was just going to say, with this COVID and the disruption in the food supply, there has been conversation across many of the folks within, or many of the players within Skagit County, to look at how can we better respond. And thinking of a policy council, a coalition, some way of bringing folks together. And interestingly enough, there's really no backbone organization that is stepping up to the plate, so to speak. So how, and I think this has been mentioned by previous folks in terms of that leadership and the financial resources needed to really establish and keep it going. And so I think that that's, there's been lots of discussion. I don't know if Steve's on this call, but we've been talking about, I've been talking with the public health department, thinking how can we get this conversation started? I love the ideas that have been presented in terms of a needs assessment or identifying the strengths and the gaps that we have in the community. And that can sometimes generate interest and start the ball rolling. We've had a couple of starts like that in the past with Skagit. We actually had the county commissioners say that a food policy council should be established. My experience has been is that the word policy scares people off. And so I really like the idea of the food systems coalition council, so that it doesn't have the political overtones that might scare people away. So I know that Skagit is at those first steps of saying, oh, okay, we need to do something because we recognize this will not be the last disruption in our food supply. And we need a better way of communicating across all of the stakeholders so we can better serve our constituents. That's my soap opera.
Great, thanks, Diane.
Yeah.
So I had a couple other things that I thought I would share. One is that while we are fiscally sponsored and we are a coalition, there is a weakness in that because there have been several initiatives that could have been really helpful to our community in COVID, and we didn't have a nonprofit that could step into that space and support it. And because our fiscal sponsor is also a nonprofit that's struggling, they didn't have the capacity to allow the Food Coalition to step into those spaces as well. So I see the strength of our being fiscally sponsored and not having to put energy into that organizational design support component of it and raising funding for that. But it also does have limitations for us being able to respond to some opportunities or critical needs. And then the other thing I wanted to share is that when COVID started to hit back in March, that's when it hit our communities, was in March. We pulled together a community forum that was about food access in this time of COVID-19. And we had a working group that came together under the leadership of our food coalition called the North Central Food Access Coalition. And that working group actually was able to do assessment of what existed really quickly in online Zoom meetings in the greater Moscow area, identify where the gaps were on the ground for people to be able to access food, and to create 3 new food access points. One being a for-profit business partnering with Inland Oasis, which is a diversity nonprofit. Another reopening a smaller access site that provides other types of services to low-income people, and then a new mobile location working with the Idaho Food Bank. So there were some really amazing things that came together, and I really believe it was because we had built those relationships across our community that we could mobilize really quickly and then bring in the new partners that we hadn't been working with around that issue. So I think for all those coalitions, networks, councils that are really focusing on relationship building, for us, COVID did show us that that was a very valuable investment.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Colette. I know we've had so many conversations about looking at the resilience of local food systems and how networks, whether formal networks or informal networks, play a role in really supporting businesses and communities throughout the pandemic. As just any sort of disturbance event, what is the underlying impact of those relationships? And it sounds like it's been really positive for many of you throughout the last 5 or 6 months to have had those relationships in place. Anyone else who wants to share or jump in?
Laura, you're muted.
I just see a question from Laura asking for Colette if she could share the agenda for that quick assessment Zoom meeting. Maybe you two can connect offline. We can connect you if you need to. It says here that Laura Raymond, are you trying to say something? Now can you talk? Let me see if that works. So strange.
So
Zoom.
Laura Raymond is calling in on the phone, so her phone will need to be unmuted in order for her to talk that way.
Laura, the only phone number I see right now is the 206 number.
Yeah, I just
Oh, there we go. Oh,
technology.
We
To chime in really quickly for people who may not be aware of the Food Policy Forum at the state level. It is also a food policy forum, and it is a multi-stakeholder group that was established by the legislature and charged the State Conservation Commission and the Department of Agriculture to co-convene, and members are appointed by the directors of those 2 agencies. And myself and Ron Schultz at the Conservation Commission and Kate Delavan, newly at the Office of Farmland Preservation, with the help of some fantastic contracted facilitators, convene and coordinate that body. Has about 30 plus appointed members, but nearly all the meetings except small work groups are open to the public. But I think what's really interesting and helpful maybe for people who are working at different jurisdictions at more local levels with more local food policy groups is that there has been an idea from the beginning of the State Food Policy Forum to, I'm getting feedback.
Now we can't hear you.
ooh, you were sounding okay there for a moment and then we lost you.
Oh, it's so strange. Okay, looks like I need to speak into my phone and be unmuted by video. So I'm sorry about the feedback.
Oh, we're not getting the feedback, but you might be.
You're not? Okay. I'll just live with it. Sorry, everyone. So essentially, there has always been an idea that there be some relationship between the state level food policy forum and food policy groups at the local level. That was an idea that was emerging about a year ago with more focus within the state conversations, which kind of got shifted like everything with COVID. But I think that's something for people who are working with local food policy forum or food policy groups to be aware of, that that's an idea that might develop more in the future about making a stronger connection. And I think the work that the Food Policy Forum is doing at the state level can be helpful to potentially to more local groups because it's framing issues at the state level. So there's been one report issued to the legislature, which I included a link to the landing website where all of the meeting minutes and reports for the forum are posted. And you can find it there. And there's going to very soon be a more recent report that's about not just recommendations, but more precise actions that could be taken, specifically in relation to COVID. Both of those reports have context statements, sort of problem statements developed that I think help kind of contextualize a lot of the issues that a lot of food policy forums end up looking at. Of course, what those issues look like at a specific local level and which ones of those are priorities at a local level can vary a lot. But I think it might be helpful to see that, oh, look, at the state level, this has already been identified by a very broad-ranging stakeholder group, includes commissions, includes community-based organizations. And it's something that we're looking at here in our local area. And here's what it looks like in our local area. Likewise, I think things that you all are doing in your local areas could be informing the state. So even if there's not a formal relationship established, I think there's kind of more of this informal networked connection possibility that's there. So just wanted to make sure people were kind of aware of that and had it on your radars to be tracking.
Thank you so much, Laura.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Laura Raymond. The ways that food policy councils can inform each other is super important. And the work at the state level informed the Whatcom, Food Systems Committee. Like, what is this title again? And I wanted to let people know that in July, the Whatcom Food System Committee wrote a letter to the county council asking for them to take specific steps in response to some of the gaps that were being seen at the local level, but they used the framework of the draft State Food Policy Forum's Early Implementation Action Report that went to the governor to frame what they wanted to say. So it was super helpful in that moment, specifically as a young group. I wasn't quite sure what to do and was not allowed to meet until late July to be able to just take that work that you all have spent so much time doing and utilize it at the local level. That's super important. And also, for a group that has not yet made any policy recommendations, it was something that helped kind of stabilize them as a group in terms of their confidence in making these statements. And then I also wanted to add that the fact that the State Food Policy Forum did not include any recommendations for worker health and safety and labor, but that also allowed for a conversation about what needs to be included at the local level and that particular gap at the state level. Laura, I'm really curious if you might speak to that in terms of the State Policy Forum's decision not to address labor and where you all are at now.
We can't hear you.
hear you.
Unmute your phone also. You have to pick your device. It looks like you're unmuted through your.
I'm unmuted
There you
everywhere.
go. There you go.
On my end, I'm
There
unmuted
you go.
everywhere.
Okay, now we hear you.
Brandon also put some comments in the chat about a previous state level food policy initiative, which was the Food Policy Roundtable, which ended in dissolution because there were a lot of factors at play, but essentially people who had initially come together were not all in consensus around the final like proposals and the actual report. So the current Food Policy Forum has that hanging over its shoulder, frankly, a previously failed process. Not to say that everything about that process was a failure by any means, but from the perspective of being able to move forward as a diverse stakeholder group with agreements and recommendations as an entire body, that wasn't accomplished. And some of the partners walked. So this new, which is not hardly new anymore, but this current Food Policy Forum initiative has that in its background. And so has been incredibly intentional about establishing, agreeing to the problems and agreeing to move forward in places where there is agreement and to prioritize action in that way. And some of the early agreements were that the forum was not going to look at production practices specifically, and also was not going to look closely at labor issues. There have been discussions in the forum around labor issues, some, not a lot. And one of the challenges does get at this issue that's been raised already earlier in our conversation here, which is around jurisdictional authority. So there is a sense that labor issues are critical. There's probably varying opinions about what needs to change or how that needs to change. But the feeling at the time when it came up was that much of the recommendations would really be federal and felt very far beyond the power or the jurisdiction of that group. There also was a sense that there wasn't enough consensus there to propose actions going forward. And the current forum is really, really committed to finding those opportunities where there is agreement and advancing those things and not getting stuck where people are just too far apart. So I don't think there's really, I don't know, there's other people on this call who are members of the forum, so chime in. But my sense is that there hasn't been a deep enough treatment of issues like labor to even have a sense that that we even know what the disagreement is, I would say. But I think people feel like they are really making progress at raising other critical issues as well and want to keep moving in that way. And I will say from my personal opinion, this is one of the most widely politically diverse stakeholder groups that most of the members themselves participate in. And so I think by being able to develop now 2 consensus reports, there's a lot of people working together whose lives sort of professional lives never intersected. And so there is this relationship and trust building happening. Especially now with COVID and the clear impacts on labor and how those labor issues are impacting industry, I wouldn't be surprised if down the road, the forum feels in a better position of strength to maybe look at those issues again, but I don't know. Again, that's just my opinion.
This is Diane. I'm on the Food Policy Forum and as a representative of CART Food System Council. And I think that I really appreciate what you said, Laura. I think you did a good job of summarizing what the group is and the strength of the coalition that's been building across a lot of diverse lines, political lines, like you said. And I think that one thing that has been successful is a conversation about hunger in the state and access to food. And there's been universal, I think quite common universal support for making sure that all the citizens of the state are fed well. And I've been personally a little surprised by that, but really think that that's a great thing that's come out of it is the information about hunger and what exists, what hunger there is in the state, and making sure that everyone is fed, farm workers and everyone. So that's been hopeful to me.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said as well, Laura and Diane. I think the process has been really helpful in terms of a lot of the sort of, knowledge gathering and then learning we do as a forum together in those early meetings that we had a couple years ago to create like shared language around different aspects of the food system. And it's been really useful in terms of some of the work that we've done recently, looking at the challenges associated with COVID. And I've just been optimistic about the work that we're doing and how we're working across several different sectors. I think that, like you said, building those relationships right now within this particular group is really fortunate. I'm glad that we had done some of that work already before we were hit with the pandemic. If anyone else wants to share, we still have time. You can post questions in the chat box. I see that there's still some questions coming up here. It looks like just some comments in the chat box. We'll make sure that we capture everything that was in the chat today. I wanted to let you all know that we're taking 2 weeks off from our hub calls. So just giving our internal office team a little bit of a breather before we head into the fall. I know that most of us are still working from home and transitioning into a new schedule with our families. And so wanting to just give everyone some space to be able to do that while we still plug away at our regular workload. So we will miss all of you for the next 2 weeks, but we really look forward to seeing you all on September 11th. We'll be continuing to update the website as well as all the other resources we have available. So we won't be gone. We'll just be taking a little bit of a break from this part of our workflow. But please continue to send us our calendar of events. And again, we will see you all on September 11th. I hope that you have a healthy and happy next couple of weeks. And I look forward to seeing you all. If you have topics that you want to suggest or speakers, please reach out to us. I want to thank all of our speakers today, especially those of you who we didn't have on the schedule, but still spoke up and wanted to share. It was really wonderful to have you all here. I feel like this is a great topic for us to continue to come back to and address in the months to come. And really look at some of the resources that are out there to really support these collectives, coalitions, networks, and councils that have come together to continue to support Washingtonians across the food system. So again, thank you all, and we will see you soon.
Okay, recording has stopped. And we're going to stop our live stream. We live streamed on YouTube, everyone, today. Woo!